It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we talked about the other day, the two Justins, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, who were expelled from the Tennessee General Assembly, they have both been reinstated by the committees that their counties had. They're back in the General Assembly, and they're going to run for re-election, and I guarantee they're going to win overwhelmingly. Which makes me go, why would the Republicans have done this? Makes no sense on its face, other than, well, they really do want to destroy democracy. This is a show of power, or is it a show of stupidity? Here to share some thoughts on which way this falls, I've asked my good friend Will Bunch to come talk with us. Will is a national columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's also written the great book After the Ivory Tower Falls: How College Broke the American Dream and Blew Up Our Politics and How to Fix It. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me. You know what they say, no Justins, no peace, right? So well, tonight we have one Justin, so I guess we have some peace. So,
but this was predictable. The Republicans had to know that once they threw these two out, and oddly enough, didn't throw out the white women, and we'll get to that. But they had to know that this was going to, at some level, backfire. Or what's your thought?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, because you're right. I mean, they expelled these guys. I mean, they had to know how the system and the process works. And they had to know that these Democratic, county committees and city councils that vote on this were gonna send them back, and they're gonna. I mean, this is just the temporary appointment, but then they're gonna run in these special elections in these districts that they won in 2020, in 2022, and they're going to win again. Everybody knows they're going to win. So it was interesting. I was trying to figure out. I'm thinking well, are they going to not seat them when they get reappointed? Because there is precedent for that. Believe it or not, I actually wrote. It's funny. I didn't write about it in my column because it was kind of between columns, but I did a long thread on Twitter about the case of Julian Bond, the famous civil rights activist who in 1966 was not seated because right before he was supposed to take his seat, he spoke out against the Vietnam War and made some comments about the draft, and they thought that was unpatriotic. It was very similar in a way to today and the gun violence issue, but he actually won two special elections to take back his seat, and he wasn't seated three times before it finally took the Supreme Court to say that the legislature had violated his First Amendment rights and basically forced them to seat Julian Bond. So I was wondering. It just seems like today's Republicans, there's no limits to how far or how low, I think I said in the column, they're willing to go to, make this power play, and they want to legitimize. They want to legitimize certain things. They want to legitimize votes in cities that come from Black and brown communities, which in this, like you said, they kicked out the two Black urban legislators, and they allowed the white woman from Knoxville to retain her seat, albeit by one vote. But
the image of that alone. I mean, if you're doing this, you got to throw her out too, just to make it look like non-partial, or nonpartisan. But they didn't. Someone said, no, we're going to make this worse.
It's a power play that we don't care how it looks, and what I can't figure out is, did they sit in a room and say, we're going to do a power play. We don't care how it looks, or are they just that dumb that they didn't see how, because as it turns out, I mean, when tonight Justin Jones led a march back to the Capitol, and he was sworn in on the steps, and they put out a statement saying, yeah, well, that's the procedure, and so we're going to let him back in. So they basically, the Republicans basically backed down tonight. They didn't like go crazy and try and not seat him a second time.
Well, they're going to have to, because they realize they screwed up. But in your most recent article, which I highly suggest folks take a look at, titled "GOP Wages Asymmetrical War on Democracy Because It Can't Get the Votes," you had what I think is the perfect line. You said citizens who cling to "it can't happen here" need to look at what is happening right now. And I got to tell you, that's a perfect statement.
Yeah. Well, this has been happening gradually, in terms of, if you go back 20 years ago, the strategy we were looking at was voter suppression, right? How do we make it hard for people who aren't our voters to cast their ballots, with voter ID and other restrictions, or taking away polling places, closing polling places on college campuses, or closing polling places in Black neighborhoods. And it was, how do we make it hard for people to vote? And the phase we've gotten to now is just throwing out the results of elections, basically. I mean, they won't call it that, but the pretexts are so flimsy. So we saw it in Tennessee with the two Justins. I mean, look, if they'd wanted to pass a reprimand saying you shouldn't have protested on the House floor, I don't know, I would have shrugged. It's like, all right, it's a reprimand. I mean,
yeah,
maybe it was a technical violation of the rules, but they had to invalidate this election. They had to tell 140,000 people your vote didn't count. But the thing, and after Tennessee, maybe this is even less likely to happen. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen. But I start the piece talking about the election in Wisconsin, because I think two things happened there that really dramatize what's going on right now. One is just the victory, and I have to apologize because I read her name all the time, but I never try and pronounce it. So you can pronounce the name of the new Democratic justice for me, because I can't pronounce.
Yeah, we're in the same boat, so thanks for throwing that back to me.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't know. Let's just call her Janet by her first name. So Janet P's victory in Wisconsin, huge voter turnout, the largest turnout for a non-presidential election of that type ever in Wisconsin history. I started with the example of the college town of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is home to the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire, in a precinct that basically is in the student center. So it's the college voting precinct. Largest turnout of any precinct in the city of Eau Claire, and 888 students came out to vote, 6 times the number of people, or 6 times the number of student voters that they had in the similar election 4 years earlier. And there were 2 issues, right? One was abortion. I mean, that was probably the biggest issue. And the other was democracy. I mean, Janet's opponent, Dan Kelly, was somebody who had actually worked for Trump in 2020 to try and throw out Wisconsin's election results. And, I think you had a lot of voters who are saying, we're just not going to stand for this guy who's going to take away our abortion rights, who's going to take away our voting rights. I don't care if it's an off-year election. I'm going to wait on this line for 2 hours, and I'm going to vote. And look, I'm not endorsing voting lines. People shouldn't have to wait 2 hours to vote, but the fact that people are willing to do that, I mean, that's democracy in action. Yeah. I mean, and to me, so that's the Democrats winning by conventional warfare when comes to politics, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to win the war of ideas. You've got that, our ideas on rights, on voting, on abortion, our ideas are better, and you're going to come out and vote for us at the ballot box, and they're going to count all the votes. And, if you like our ideas and our candidate best, we'll win, and will take office, and that's how it's supposed to work. And it seems even silly to talk about that because that's how it's supposed to be. But Republicans have realized that they're not winning that way. They've lost the popular vote in 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections. They seriously underperformed in the last 2 midterms as well. And now they're getting blown out. I mean, so Janet beats Dan Kelly by 11 points in this state that Joe Biden only won by 20,000 votes. And the Republicans are panicking. And so they are trying to undo democracy. And Tennessee was one example. But in Wisconsin, you have state legislators, state lawmakers seriously talking about impeaching this new justice before she's even taken the oath of office.
Yeah, in fact, that actually came up even before the election. That was something that he would be open to. And you go,
this guy was running. That? This guy was running in a special election in I forget. I think it was outside of Milwaukee. But if the Republican won this special election, and it's a Republican district, if the Republican won, the Republicans would have a supermajority in Madison, in the state capitol, which means they could do things like, pass an impeachment on a party line vote. And the guy who was running in that special election said he was seriously considering impeaching her if she won. And I guess the pretext, and we're seeing this a lot. They're using criminal justice and crime as a pretext, right? They're saying that because they're Democratic DAs, progressive liberal DAs in these cities, and progressive liberal judges, and they're letting criminals. That's the argument. The argument is they're letting all the criminals off. Yeah, they're letting off criminals. They're letting criminals run wild in these cities, and that's an impeachable offense.
It's the reason that DeSantis got rid of Andrew Warren, who we've had on the program a couple of times.
And here in Philadelphia, where I am, with the very progressive prosecutor, Larry Krasner, was impeached by the House Republicans. It was held up in the courts, and the Senate realized it was so ridiculous they're not going to actually vote on it. So he'll just have this impeachment on his record that they never tried him or voted on.
I actually like him. I've had him on the show a couple of times. Good
he's
guy.
Great. I mean, and he's like any political figure. I don't 100% agree with everything he does.
But I don't 100% agree with anything I do.
Yeah, no, same, right? So, but yeah, I mean, he's taking Philadelphia in the right direction. I mean, his office has now liberated, I think, 28 people who were wrongfully convicted of murder in Philadelphia, for example. And we need stuff like that. And that people don't credit that. It's they blame him. They blame him for murders, which how you blame a district attorney for a murder, haven't quite figured that out. But but they do that, and but all over the country, in Kim Gardner, the DA in St. Louis, they're trying to strip her power away. There's been a lot of attention because it kind of relates to the Trump investigations, but there's been a lot of attention to this bill in Georgia that, again, would give Republican legislators the power to remove these prosecutors like Fani Willis in Atlanta. And it's this war. And what do these people have in common? They were elected by an urban electorate. They were elected by people not like them, by black and brown voters, or college educated white liberals, maybe in some cases, but they were elected by the enemies of today's Republicans, the woke left that they're at war with. And they're coming up with these pretexts now to, like I said, they've gone beyond trying to make it hard to vote. They're just going to take away your vote.
No, and that's sadly where we're heading. And then again, I go back to the quote, because we all look at the, the fascist era of the past and ask the question, you didn't say it can't happen here. How could that possibly happen? And as you point out, maybe take a look at what's going on, at what they're actually doing. I do want to get your thoughts on the RNC going to Nashville on Friday to hold their little shindig. Kind of interesting timing. I know this has been long planned, but kind of more attention on them.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure they regret now that they're going there, but in a way, but um, they can't undo it. Yeah, they're really in a catch-22. I mean, if their thing is that they can't win elections anymore and they have to do these other things to get around, they have to do these workarounds to get around elections. It's this downward spiral because the more, I mean, how many more votes did they lose from young voters with what happened in Tennessee last week? Uh, I mean, they're really losing a whole generation. I don't think I mentioned in that precinct in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where college students lined up to vote. I mean, they voted 87% Democratic.
Wow.
And you can say college kids have always leaned liberal to some extent, but not at the numbers we're seeing
And well, no, you could always
right
say
now.
they've and this is always the problem. You can always say they've leaned Democratic, but do they get out and vote? And in this moment, they have, which is why I said from the beginning, undoing Roe was a horrible thing for
Yeah,
Republicans because this was going to continually bite them. And it's going to, especially as Republicans show who they are by coming out with these even more draconian, these more outrageous, we want to track your menstruation cycle kind of bills. I mean, it's getting crazier.
yeah. I mean, I'm the dad of I have a millennial daughter. She just turned 30 late last year, actually, and so her and I know a lot of her friends, and they've been very politically activated these last few years, and it started with Trump, and then it just went right into this abortion thing,
Yeah.
and look, in America, America's not like other countries that have mandatory voting or have a tradition of 90% voter turnout or whatever. When I was growing up, voter turnout in this country was what, 50%. It's better than that now, but it's still a game of, if you can get people really worked up who weren't voting and get them to come out to vote. I mean that's basically, I hate to say it, but it's basically how Trump won in 2016, that he excited a lot of
Yep.
people in these places like Altoona and these rural
No, places that
communities.
used to be somebody, places
Right,
that used to have manufacturing, places that used to have opportunity and all.
right, and those people had gotten so despondent, right, that they weren't voting in big numbers.
Yep.
And Trump, who to their ears was, quote, telling it like it is, unquote, got them excited and got the people, and you had people lining up in those communities to vote. And I mean, and Trump won in 2016. He got 74 million votes in 2020, which is amazing, but he also alienated these young people and other voters to the extent where Biden got 81
Yep.
million votes.
And
And
fortunately, and we are, I think we're moving in a decent direction. I like the policies coming out of this administration, but I hope folks will check out the new piece, Will, GOP Wages Asymmetrical War on Democracy, because it can't get the votes, written by our good friend Will Bunch over at the Philadelphia Inquirer. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Will, I appreciate the time. As always, incredible work. Hope folks will check it out.
thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Outstanding. Our good friend Will Bunch. Again, make sure you take a look at the piece. We'll get links out on social media. Again, take a quick break. Right back after this with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people of the talk.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania, to the auto factories of Michigan, to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
The old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The Inflation Reduction Act will lower energy prices and create millions of new jobs by dramatically increasing the manufacturing of solar panels, wind turbines, electric cars, and energy-efficient home appliances. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice as Americans.
We are AFGE. We support our nation's military and our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders and provide services to our nation's seniors across the country and here in Washington, D.C. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
So what I find interesting, and again, this is the folks over at the Federal Railroad Administration, they've come out and said that the railroads have to prioritize train makeup to maintain safety, prevent accidents, and optimize train performance. Now, you may remember when we were talking about the derailments, a couple months ago, back after the February 3rd, derailment in East Palestine. One of our guests said, look, these railroad companies are making these big, long trains, and they're not distributing the weight. They're throwing heavy trains on the end, and there's no real rhyme or reason, whereas in the old days, as somebody who drives a truck, the heavy, and I've driven doubles for most of my life, the heavy trailer goes in front, the light trailer goes in back, just because of gravity and momentum and all of that stuff. So what their argument is that these train companies are going, these train barons are going, just slap them all together and get them down the road. Don't care. And what's causing it is having, more weight at the back end, pushing everything forward and causing these derailments and then making them worse. And the reason they're doing it, of course, it's the money. It's the money, like everything else. Let's go to the phone. It's got Alice on one. Alice, how are you?
Totally insane and disturbed.
What has you today?
Huh?
What has you today?
Everything. So what I wanted to say was, you at the beginning of the show, you were talking about the divisions between, the two different groups, and I think to a degree that's true. But I think the main issue is number one, we have this collection of the right-wing Republican voters that have been so brainwashed that by lies, that, we're a Christian nation and you got to do this, and the preachers jumped in on it. And then you have the politicians screaming and telling all these lies that simply aren't true. And, we can reason with someone that's reasonable and come to some sort of agreement, that, okay, we both want children to be safe and we want this and we want that. But that small group, which seems to be growing, I don't think there's any reasoning with them, Rick. I don't think there's...
And there's some people you're never going to reach. This is where the majority of people who are still reachable have to come together. And right. I've come into this mindset of, if I'm going to be canceled, I'm going to be canceled, because the extremes I don't care about anymore. We've got to move forward and figure out the stuff that's important and do it in a way that gives people the opportunity to lead their best lives. That's, again, my true north. If I step on some toes, I'm okay with that.
Right, and I'm with you. Everybody has individual differences and ideas. But I think the main thing that we're going to have to do is something's going to have to be done about these propaganda stations and the propaganda being pushed by the right-wing politicians. You have a good day.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate it. And look, the reality is what has to happen is there needs to be, I'm someone who believes in more speech, not less. More opportunities to talk to people. We need to come back to the reality that our politics should be where we solve problems, not cause them. And sadly, over the last several years, with the rise of the Tea Party and the rise of the Freedom Caucus and the rise of all of these moneyed groups who are being funded by billionaires, it's more about division than it is about getting stuff done. It's more about causing problems than fixing problems. And look, here's the thing. This is where the hope is. When I talk to individuals, and even ones wearing the shirt a lot of the times, the hat's a different story, but the shirt, if they got the shirt on, because without the hat, I think the brain still functions. I can get a lot of people who bought the shirt going, yeah, that's reasonable. There is a way to talk to people, and in fact, in Wisconsin, the reason that they got such a great turnout is they did what I've been saying you need to do. You need to start not talking to people. You get friends and neighbors talking to each other. You get coworkers talking to each other. You get people sharing their stories, their ideas, their hopes, their thoughts, their dreams. That's the way forward. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Grab the podcast. Back after this.
I've been driving buses for 5 years, and my day-to-day routine is I wake up a little earlier than most people. I get on a bus, I go out, I pick up some students and make sure they get to school nice and safe. Here in Fairbanks, Alaska, that can be a challenge because of the winter weather and the icy roads. But I love the job. So the Teamsters are great. They provide us a lot of protections. They've always taken care of their people, made sure that our jobs were secure. We didn't have to worry about whether or not we'd have a job from day to day. And that's amazing because before we'd be working 4, 6, 8 hours a day and only earning minimum wage. It was real difficult to make a living. And then the Teamsters pushed a lot so we make something we can live off of and not have to have a second job. What absolutely gives me peace of mind, the union membership allows me to focus on this job without having to worry about whether or not my family is going to be taken care of. I'm Andrew Case, and I'm proud to be Teamsters Local 959.
Before we close the program, we want to take a moment to thank our viewers and to share a little bit about why we do what we do. At the Rick Smith Show, we believe that media today is almost entirely controlled by corporate greed. So we have now 24-hour news channels. But instead of 24 hours of news, what we get is 1 hour repeated 24 times, and with tons of commercials creating obscene amounts of profits. Information once presented as a public service has now become a private commodity. So when lies make money, lies are what we get. We get a corporate-controlled rage machine feeding us anger and hate, trying to convince us that our problems are right, left, or red, blue, when they are and always have been up, down, the wealthiest 1% versus the rest of us. Our goal is to be an alternative to that machine, not as a news show with a fancy journalist out front, but as a talk show run by a union truck driver and a team of working-class heroes just like you. Everything we do, both what we get right and what we get wrong, is dedicated to advancing the interests of America's working families. No corporate ad buys, no think tanks, no focus groups, no talking points. We are media by working people, for working people. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.